Okay. So yesterday we spoke about how there's this concept of iskafia sitrachra, overcoming the other side, the evil, in dvarim hamutarim, permitted things, which are completely permitted. And we spoke about what that means, completely permitted, right? There are things that halacha does not allow us to do. And then there are things that even though halacha may allow us to do, but for ourselves, we know that it's not good for us to be doing those things. And then there are things where there's really no good reason not to do it, but it happens to be that subjectively the person has an animalistic urge. And then the idea here is that out of one's devotion to Hashem, one wants to bring a sacrifice, to slaughter the inclination, by abstaining or withholding even for a short while, in order to show both Hashem and the soul, and the animal soul where one's true priorities lie. Now, what does that do for Hashem? How does he feel about that? So, we are at the right-hand column of the page. So let's just go back a little bit. So we see where it says, so too restrains his mouth from uttering words that his heart longs to express, concerning mundane matters. Likewise with thoughts of his mind, even the least way, thereby the sitrachra should be below, the glory and holiness of Holy Blessed be He goes forth above to a great extent. So this idea being that it elicits the pleasure of Hashem, pleasure of God. Now, the expression that is used is from the Zohar. And the Zohar uses the expression that when one subdues the sitrachra, one subdues this little bit, the evil even a little bit, it says that the glory of Hashem raises up. It uses the term estalik. Estalik means to raise up. So for instance, when we speak about somebody who has departed the world and their soul goes up to heaven, how would you say that if you were speaking Aramaic? They're estalik. So, which relates to the Hebrew word siluk, removal. So this is an odd expression because you're saying, wait a minute, I'm going to do this thing that shows that God, how much I'm devoted to Him, how much I care about Him, how much my animal soul isn't the governing force in my life, isn't the thing that really matters to me, and the result is God is going to ascend and remove Himself to go to higher realms. I would expect God to become more engaged with me, right? If someone offers you a gift out of love, right, you generally don't withdraw from the person, the opposite, right? You become more expressive. And so the way to understand this is that Chassidus explains that the word that's used here can be understood in two ways. One way is much more, how should I say this? Is more straightforward. And that's that when something ascends, it was on a lower level, and now it's left the lower level, now it's on a higher level. Okay? But it can also be the reverse, that ascending really means descending. I'm going to stop and say that again. Ascending really means descending. So when it says that the glory of Hashem ascends, what it really means is that the glory of Hashem descends. Yeah. And if the glory of Hashem descends, well then, He's more with us. He's more present, yes? Why are people looking at me?
Because you're saying that it means the opposite.
And why can't it mean the opposite? Because that makes no sense.
You're saying ascent in terms of, like, the value, not in terms of height.
Well, I mean, we're not talking about God in physical sense, are we?
No, but usually when you think of ascent, it kind of like, you think of it like we are here, and so if Hashem is ascending, He goes like up.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Up.
I don't know. But are you saying that it means that Hashem is ascending
Going up and
down,
down,
like
it just, like it sounds funny.
It does sound funny.
It doesn't make sense. Like, when I say I'm happy, I really mean I'm sad. Well, when I say I'm going up, I really
Wait a minute.
mean
Let's actually think about that for a second. I'm going to answer your question, but I want us to stop and appreciate how language gets used a little bit, especially when we're talking about things like Chassidus. How are you doing? Wonderful. So what does that mean?
Okay, but that's like with the tone.
That is with a tone. And you know what the problem with written text is?
You don't have the tone.
There's no tone. And you know what makes learning Talmud so difficult?
Punctuation.
No, that's not. There's actually punctuation. That's not true. You just don't know the punctuation. Punctuation. You don't know the tone. You have to add the tone with punctuation. Like, I can tell you the punctuation. Not like it uses words for punctuation, and it has very sophisticated punctuation. If you know if you know it, you can look at a page of Talmud and you say, okay, that's where that ends. That's what you can break it up. It's not such a hard thing to do. Punctuation is you need to know the tone, okay? Right? And the tone keeps shifting. Well, how do I know? It's not the question I'm waiting to answer. It's a less interesting question. Okay. So we use words sardonically all the time, right? Where we say something, we really mean the opposite of what we mean, right?
So what's the intention here?
Okay. I'm not saying that's the only way this works.
But if you know that we're learning from a written text, and we wouldn't know why
But it says
Wait. Let's. The Alter Rebbe writes, and I quote, in the introductory letter to the Tanya. It is known, the current saying amongst our people, that listening to words of advice is not the same as seeing and reading them in a book. For the reader reads according to his own manner and mind, according to his own mental grasp and comprehension at a particular time. Hence, if his intelligence and mind are confused and wander about in darkness in God's service, he finds it difficult to see the beneficial light that is concealed in books, even though the light is pleasant to the eyes and brings healing to the soul. So yeah, books are a lousy way to educate people. Skipping a bit. As for him whose mind would fall short in understanding the counsel given in these pamphlets, let him discuss his problem with the foremost scholars of the town, and they will elucidate it for him. So the Alter Rebbe does not think that a book is a solution to a problem. A book is a part of a solution to a problem. You're living people. Right? We have a concept in Torah called Masorah. You know what Masorah means? The handing over of the way we do things, the knowledge, the understanding, yes? If I hand you a Torah scroll, forget the fact that you may not know the Hebrew language. Let's say you know the Hebrew language. I hand you a Torah scroll. Do you know how to read it? No, because there's no vowels. There's no cantillation notes. There's no commas. You don't know where the sentences start and end. Yes. So, for instance, there's a verse that says "Hashofet kol ha'aretz lo yasa mishpat." You know what that means? Well, if you read it like a question and you put the hey in the front with a patach sound, which is easier to do if you're Ashkenazic, as opposed to a kamet sound, then you read it like this: Hashofet kol ha'aretz lo yasa mishpat. Will the judge of all earth not do justice? It's a question asking how could God act unjustly? Perfectly reasonable thing. But if you read it as a statement and you put a comment there, or you don't clearly differentiate between the patach and the comments like the Sephardim do, then you read Hashofet kol ha'aretz lo yasa mishpat. The judge of all the earth won't do justice, which is kind of heretical. And which one is it? And when it says to annihilate the blank of a Amalek, what does the Torah say? To annihilate the memory of Amalek. How do you say the memory of Amalek? Zech. There's a dispute there. Is it Zech or Zecha? But okay. Okay, but you know, it could be annihilate Zachar Amalek. You know what Zachar Amalek means? Oh, the males. There was a mistake about that, actually. One of the generals of King David, he wiped out all the males. And he thought he did the right thing because his teacher was not exactly the most qualified. So, yeah. We don't just throw books at people and say, no, figure it out. That's not the way to learn.
Is it passed down from the Alter Rebbe, the students?
Well, it's passed down. Many things are passed down, but then you also realize that there are other Rebbes too, right? So, and they also say things. But yes, there's this idea of tradition. Now, getting back to the thing. So, one thing is that yes, sometimes words, the tone of voice totally changes the meaning of the word. So, it's a common thing is that Talmud speaks in rhetorical questions that are emphasizing their negation, such as it'll say, "Do we say?" when it really means we obviously don't say, right? Or do we think? It means we obviously don't think that. Okay. So you just have to know that you read it with that tone of voice. But there are other reasons why words may not mean exactly what they seem to mean. Okay. One of them is that you have the context wrong, and so it's inconceivable that the word could mean something else other than what you think it is. So, for instance, if we take a word in a physical sense, that often limits us in understanding what the word can mean. So, for instance, if I say something ascend, so we think, okay, there's physical space, there's something is here, and then it goes there. Okay, so this space is the bottom space, this is the top space, it's moving from the bottom to the top, that's ascending. And so the opposite would be descending. Now, unless I want to just be arbitrary about what's called the top and the bottom, but the word ascending means moving from the place that is identified as bottom to the place identified as top, and there's no other way to conceive of that physically, right? Okay. Can you ascend in other ways that aren't physical? Go up in other ways? Yeah. Knowledge, right? So you ascend in knowledge. Okay. Yeah, so up in strength. Okay. Now, so here's an interesting question, right? Let us say you become more knowledgeable. Everyone around you is kind of the, vulgar masses of people whose level of being informed and comprehension of reality is basically what they amass from social media. And you have ascended in knowledge and you know deep truths. You're coming close to the level of the prophets, let's say. Just for argument's sake. So what has happened? Have you become closer to the people or have you come further away from the people? Further away from the people, right? So as you've ascended, you've left their level, you've left their station, yes? Okay. Can they feel that? Can the other people feel that? Well, not if you lock yourself in a room and don't talk to them. But if you're present with them and they're all chatting about what they read on TikTok, right? And they're in the presence of someone who doesn't seem to affect them whatsoever, right? Who's connected to something so deep and so profound, what do they feel? They feel this loftiness, right? And where is that loftiness? Where is it present? It's present, but not physical, but is it present with these lowly people? The feeling that there's something lofty here. This person is living on a different plane. They can feel that. Yeah. But those people are on a lowly plane. So where's the loftiness? Above them. It's not above them, because if it's above them, how would they feel it? On the level which these people are living their life, what are they feeling when they're in your presence because you're coming close to the level of the prophets? What do they feel? Do they feel there's something lofty and profound and transcendent? Okay. And they feel that in the space in which they live, right? Okay. Now, what you could have done is you could have locked yourself in a room, right? Or you could have metaphorically locked yourself in a room by you saying you are of this lofty level, but you make sure to keep it hidden so they don't feel it. So you're sitting with them and they don't think that you're any different than them. In which case, your loftiness is on a lofty level, but your loftiness could also be on a lower level. In other words, like this. When something is present, is it present? Right? Now, instead of thinking about the idea of removal, right, or withdrawal, which is one idea, right, and the word siluk does connote that, we could then think of another idea. Are you present in a way where you have obscured your loftiness, or are you present in a way where your loftiness is manifest? And if you're present in a way where your loftiness is manifest, then where are you bringing your loftiness? You're descending. And so what is it describing is happening to the glory of God? That the glory of God in all of its loftiness and all of its transcendence is actually being made manifest where? Down here. And so what does it really mean is happening? The glory of God has descended. Why is it called ascent? Because what has descended is its ascendant quality. This does not make sense if you think about a physical object moving. And it can make quite intuitive sense if you think about things like levels of being or social status or things like this, things that have a qualitative dimension of higher and lower, of transcendent, presence, immanence.
So it also
It is, but what is very important to understand is that when you're dealing with the kinds of topics that Chassidus deals with, you have to use language in these types of ways. I mean, you can use language not like this, but then it becomes very annoying to use. You would say something like, then you get like these very technical, academic sounding words, which are hard to parse. You say something like, the transcendent quality of the divine is made manifest on the lowly mortal plane. Which, okay, you could parse that sentence, right? Or you could say something that's a little more evocative, right? You could say, right, that the glory of God ascends, but your mind is attuned to this way of thinking. In other words, to use a totally different an example of the same type of an issue. I'll give you two examples. Number one, if you are very pedantic and analytical in how you deal with language, and you read poetry, you're going to be very frustrated. Why? The poetry. You're very analytical and pedantic in how you read things. Because poetry is more letting the words shift your consciousness in all sorts of interesting different ways, right? And playing off of each other rather than being stuck to the literal, precise meaning of grammatical forms. Now, again, it doesn't mean it's all hippy dippy, do whatever you want, right? But it is a different mindset. You need to approach it as poetry, right? Okay. Lahavdil. Has anyone ever studied a piece of Talmud at all? Anywhere? You ever seen the art scroll? Okay. How come there's so many words in the English?
Because they have to clarify things.
So why didn't the sages do that?
Because we're idiots not.
What?
I'm stupid.
So there's the idiot argument, but I prefer it slightly
The point
different.
is to work with.
No, it's not. That's not the point.
No, because they knew the intention of their words.
That's right. They were speaking to people in a shared context. And what happens when your mind starts to actually live in that space? You know what happens when you look in the art scroll and all those big paragraphs? You know what they look like? Really annoying to read. Why? Because it can be said so much more clearly. In fact, the clearest way to say it is the way the Talmud said it. And if you translate it into English, it still sounds like Talmudic. And then, and then if you ever listen to two rabbis talking about some sort of halacha concept, even if they're using like English with some yeshiva words thrown in, and you try to find, they sound like that because, say it's usher. How can it be usher? There's no chalais. You don't need to have a chalais because obviously, you're just like, they're in the same space, right? Okay, so what would you expect about a text that deals with spiritual matters? To use words for someone whose mind is in that space, right? Okay? It doesn't mean there's no need for explanation. I don't mean to say that. What I mean to say is that this is a good place that when we read things in Chassidus, we tend to have a rigidity that we borrow from the physical world, impose it on things, and that gets ourselves stuck. This is like a very extreme example of it, where the word ascend, in terms of the verb aspect of it, is actually the opposite. It's referring to the descension of something. But why is it called the ascension? Because what is descending is the ascendant quality. The lofty quality of the thing is coming into experience. That's what it means. Okay. Now, should I say something radical or should we move on?
Radical.
Let's see. When you phrase it like that, there's like no. See, if I ever fail being a rabbi, I can be a salesman. Not that different. Okay, what? I don't like business. This clarification was made quite explicit by the previous Rebbe in the last discourse that he wrote, Basilagani. Okay. Because what Basilagani is dealing with is the Shekhinah, the divine presence, and what happens is that people sin, and as the people sin, what happens to the divine presence? The divine presence withdraws and is removed. And then, it goes on and says, and when you overcome evil, Skafi Sitrach, quoting this very section of the Zohar, Estalak Yikr D'Kut Shabrichu, the glory of God ascends. And that's somehow the remedy to the problem. Like, wait a minute. If the problem is when you sin, the presence of God ascends, right? it departs from the world and goes to the higher planes, whatever that means, right? And now I'm going to overcome the sitra achra, I'm going to the evil, and that rectifies the problem. And then the expression using from the Zohar is that what happens? It ascends. Well, they can't mean the same thing, can it? And so he explains that the idea here is it's talking about the kind. It's not really what we mean here is not the verb of ascending, right? But that its ascendant quality is coming into reality, and so it's actually the inverse. It's the descending. It's undoing what happened in the sin. The divine presence is coming back. The divine presence is transcendent, and so the transcendence of Hashem is being made manifest in the world, and that's why it's called ascending. Not because there's the departure of the divine presence, the opposite. Now, what you have to realize is, going back to this, right, is that when you're in the presence of something that is truly transcendent and it's fully present with you, you have this paradoxical thing where you feel it's right there imminently with you, and you also feel it's totally beyond you and unrelatable. So it's like there, it's there. It's there in the sense that it's not available to you. Okay? To contrast this, there are some things that are not available to you, but there's a sense that if I can only get closer, I would get it. This is the opposite. So let's say, for instance, I have money in my safe, and you don't have access to money. Your sense is, well, if I had access to it, I'd get the money, right? But if you're the presence of someone whose depth of connection to Hashem is approaching prophetic levels, do you have a sense like I could get there? Or do you have a sense like, this is right, it's right here and totally beyond me at the same time? And that's really the quality being communicated with this phrase from the Zohar. That when we subdue the sitra achra, what's happening? The ungettability of God, that the transcendent, elusive, ultimate truth of God, it becomes imminently present in the world. But so is it more relatable or less relatable? It's like, that's not really such a binary. It's like, it's very relatable in how unrelatable it is. In a very immediate way. And if we were sensitive, we could even feel it, which we'll get to soon. Okay. So now here's the I didn't get to the wild thing yet.
But what was
This is now.
what's the word for withdrawal?
Silk. It's the same word. It's the same word. Now, what word do we refer to when we want to speak of a holy tzaddik that he has departed this world? Istalkos. And so when the Rebbe published the next installment of this discourse, before the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Rebbe put an introduction. And the Rebbe made a note that the word histalkos, in reference to the passing of the previous Rebbe, should be understood in light of the previous Rebbe's own explanation of the meaning of the word in his last discourse, which he published only the first installment of before he passed away. Which therefore means, the Rebbe concludes, that when someone of that caliber passes away, what's really happening?
Getting closer to us.
They're closer to us. So then why do we feel like they're gone?
Because they're physical.
What?
Because we can't see them.
Because the beyondness of them is fully present. Right? We're used to things being present in a way that they're manageable and relatable, right? And with this, what the Zohar is getting, it really does feel like it's ascended. Like it's not, the word is being used for a reason, because when you encounter this thing, it really does feel like, going back to the example of passing the tzaddik, it really does feel like the tzaddik has departed the world. But the opposite has happened. What's happened is that the tzaddik has descended fully into the world. And when the tzaddik descends fully into the world, what's the problem? The physical human manifestation of the tzaddik's soul is no longer viable mode of containment. And so what happens? In what way do you feel like you get him and you can relate to him and you can interact with him? You lose that. So what does it feel like to you? Right? If your best friend all of a sudden attained near prophetic levels, you would somehow feel like you've lost your friend on some level, right? Even if they're sitting right next to you. Because you're like, you can't relate. So when someone is fully present in all of their unrelatability, it feels like they've left, even though they're more present. And that's what's describing happens to God's presence when we delay saying a joke that we have no good reason to say for 26 seconds, as we discussed yesterday. All right. Controversial enough, we can move on? Yeah. Okay. Now, there's an effect of this. And from this holiness issues a sublime holiness on the man below to assist him with a great and powerful aid in serving God who is blessed. So what happens because God is now more fully present with you? You are now able to what? More effectively serve God. Okay. Now, we're going to come back to what that means. I want to just give it like a very general sense, and we're going to come back a little bit later to what that means on a more precise level. Okay. I'm going to use the analogy of small children in the playground. This is not a perfect analogy, but it's sufficient for our purposes. If you have small children in the playground, and their mother is not there, their father is not there, okay, there tends to be some level of anxiety, and that tends to inhibit the child because they don't feel very safe and secure, which is why they want the parent to come to the park to be there, right? Make sense? 3, 4-year-olds? Yeah. Okay. I'm not talking like 9, 10-year-olds. 3, 4-year-olds. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Which child which child has a stronger sense of attachment to the parent? Or which parent has a stronger bond to the child? The child who the parent sits there on the bench, and the child comes back every few minutes, checks in with the parent, and doesn't go too far from the parent, or the child who rarely comes back to the parent and goes all over the playground while the parent sits on the bench. Who has a stronger bond with the parent? Second one. Right, now why is that? Because you would think, but isn't it the first one? Because the first one they're always interacting.
Yeah, that's secure attachment.
What?
No.
No.
No,
It's the opposite. Second one is they have a sense that the parent is there even when they're on the other side of the playground and not talking to them, and so they don't need to run back and check in all the time, and they can travel further distances.
The first one's like anxious.
Are you still here? Are you still here? You're still paying attention to me? Now, here's the funny thing, though. Who is more consciously aware of the parent? The one who's going back all the time, right? So we see that, in some sense, the parent's presence being much more present in the mind of the child, in a way the child isn't even consciously aware of, actually empowers the child to be more functional and do more things, yes? So what happens if Hashem's ultimate transcendence is really present with you in your life? Does that make you more consciously aware of him? Not necessarily. But you know what it does do? Let's go back to the text. What does it do? It helps you serve him. You become much more capable in your avodas Hashem, in your service of God, than you otherwise would. Because you have that bond. You have that sense of him, but it's not conscious. It's like this conscious, you're thinking about him all the time. In other words, you are living in a different space. A space where his presence, forms the context of your psyche, like the, securely attached child who's like running around the other side of the playground, not thinking about their parent, but has a sense that their parent is there and gives them that sense of security. And how do we achieve this with God? That's right. And right, it's like just a little bit now and then. That's all. Okay. So if you really want to have a profound relationship with Hashem, not only does that lead you to do a skafia like we learned yesterday, the skafia then ends up helping you. And we call this a virtuous cycle, right? When A is a good thing, leads to B, which is a good thing. And then B leads to a furthering of A, which is a good thing, and so on and so forth. And what happens? Things build. Right? That's how, positive things are supposed to work. Okay. Now, we're going to take a small detour. We're really coming to the end of the chapter. We're going to set aside this whole question of how this actually affects us, and we're going to move, because he's going to bring up two topics. We're going to talk about one, and then we'll come back to this topic that we're in. This is also what the sages meant. If a man consecrates himself in a small measure down below, he is sanctified much more above. We'll come back to the means. Apart, this is what we're focusing on, from his fulfilled the positive command of the Torah, sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy. Okay? There is a mitzvah in the Torah to be holy. Okay? And that is what we're going to talk about. The mitzvah to be holy. Now, before we go forward, I do want to point out that the standard way that when people talk about the mitzvah to be holy, they quote the verse Kadeshim Tiyu, which means you should be holy. if you look, does the Alter Rebbe quote that verse as the base of the commandment to be holy? Does he say be holy? What does the verse say? You think the English or the Hebrew? We're going to talk about the mitzvah being holy. Normally, you say that there's a mitzvah to be holy. The Torah says, "Kadoshim to you should be holy." Does the Alter Rebbe make use of that verse when discussing the mitzvah to be holy? No. What verse does he use? Biskadishtem, which means to make yourself holy or sanctify yourself. Okay, we're going to ignore that difference for right now, but it is important. The Alter Rebbe is going to discuss this. Right now, we're just going to talk about the idea there's a mitzvah to be holy in general. Okay. How many mitzvahs are in the Torah?
613.
Did you count them? The Rambam did. That's true. So the Gemara tells us that there are 613 mitzvahs. How does the Gemara know there's 613 mitzvahs? Did the Gemara count the mitzvahs?
Probably.
The Gemara says that we teach every Jewish child Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, the Torah that Moshe commanded us. Torah is a numerical value of 611, actually. And how many things do we hear directly from God? 2, so that makes a total of 613. Right, okay, fine. And on the basis of that tradition, there's 613 mitzvahs. Okay, so then there becomes a question about what are the mitzvahs. The Rambam, he counted the mitzvahs, and he took the view that if you're going to count the mitzvahs, there has to be a method to the madness, right? You have to have rules about what counts as a mitzvah, what doesn't count as a mitzvah. Not every time God says, so do you do something, does that count as a mitzvah? We're not going to count every single day that you keep Pesach as a separate mitzvah. First day of Pesach is one mitzvah, second day of Pesach is a separate mitzvah. Like, how are you going to, there has to be rules that consistently apply to get you to the 613. And to be fair, not everyone agrees with him, but that's the general idea. And so he says that one of the rules is that a mitzvah has to tell you to do something specific. It can't be what's called a mitzvah koleles. It can't be an all-encompassing commandment. If the commandment is, and thou shalt observe my commandments and hearken to my voice, it's not much of a mitzvah, because what that basically means is do the other mitzvahs, right? Right? But not wearing wool and linen, that counts as a mitzvah because that's how you do something specific. Okay? So, we'll do a little quiz. Loving your fellow Jew. The Rambam count that as a mitzvah.
Yeah. No.
Well, because now what's my follow-up question going to be?
What?
What specific thing do you have to do?
That would be its own.
Is there a mitzvah? It's like
just don't embarrass someone.
there's a separate mitzvah.
So I guess just loving fellow Jews is not a separate mitzvah.
Well, he actually holds it's a separate mitzvah.
That was my first answer.
He does say it's a separate mitzvah. Do you know why? Because he says you're supposed to love every Jew like yourself. And it seems to be that he says you're supposed to feel a certain way about them, and therefore conduct yourself in the following ways, and he gives conduct that should stem from the feeling you're supposed to have. And one of those things, so you can debate whether the feeling he means is part of the mitzvah or not. Many people read that he thinks the feeling is actually part of the mitzvah, but set that aside, even if you didn't want to say that. Part of the mitzvah of your fellow Jew is saying nice things about them. You know that, according to the Rambam, loving your fellow Jew means the same way that you like it when people say nice things about you. You should feel that way about other Jews and want to say nice things about them.
Want to or to do it? Because
the way he says is you should love them, and therefore and because you love them, therefore you speak their
No,
praises.
it's true.
No.
Lashon hara, like you shouldn't speak about people bichlal because like.
That's not true. That's a lie. That's a lie. There's no such thing as not speaking about people. I don't know who came up with that. That is a total lie. It is a total lie.
I'm not joking. They would say.
Total lie.
Even like talking good about a person.
It's a total lie.
No, you shouldn't have good about a person to someone who doesn't like them.
That's right. And you're not allowed to talk about people just because you like gossiping and being a yenta and just.
I think.
No, like there's actually no, and there's different categories of speech. There's something called lashon hara, which is mean you're saying something which is true, about a person, but is negative, and you're not allowed to do that. And there are rules exactly about that. Okay, I'm not going into all those rules. Stringent versions of the rules, right? Yeah. Okay. One of those rules, which is that there's something called the dust of lashon hara, which is like, you're going after the wagon, it's kicking up dust, so you're like in the same vicinity. It's the vicinity of lashon hara, and that is when you know that somebody does not like a sub person, right? And you say positive things about that person, which becomes an instigation to then turn the conversation to negative things. Okay, that's fine, but that's not here. Or to say positive things where the context is negative, like to say about a person, they who would have thought they would ever be so frum? It's just amazing how they were able to turn their life around and be so frum. Like that's not the thing. That's called avak lashon hara. The context matters, the tone of voice, these kinds of things. They matter. Okay, fine. Then there's something called rechilas. Rechilas means what we call gossiping. You're talking about people, and there's really no reason why you need to be talking about them. Nothing good is being accomplished. You know who I saw at the store yesterday? Yeah, I saw, and she said that she saw, and then what good is going to come from this? Generally nothing, and usually bad stuff. That's called rechilas. That's also prohibited. Yeah. On the other hand, you come home and you say, I was in shul and I saw Mrs. Goldstein, and she was telling me about this class that she's giving, and I'm just so impressed. She gives I never realized she's so knowledgeable. You just, and nobody dislikes her, nobody anything. You're just like, wow, you're like, that's actually a mitzvah. If that you like the person and therefore you want to share how the good you see in that person with other people, that's actually a mitzvah in the Torah according to the Rabbi. So, which is now, let's do another one. Is tshuva a mitzvah?
Yeah.
Why? What is the special thing you have to do?
According to Rambam, there are certain steps, and if you can. Yeah.
If I don't acknowledge that I did tshuva?
No.
Sure?
Apologize and you have to
Okay, not to another.
Yeah.
Between me and God.
Yeah.
So what do I have to do if I want to do the mitzvah of tshuva?
Say sorry.
Say sorry? So that's called vidui, right? Vidui, confess my sins, say I'm sorry, all that kind of thing.
And vow to never do it again.
The vowing never to do it again. That's actually what all you have to do. Is that so? There's an interesting discussion. Is that called the mitzvah? Is the commitment to never do it again a separate thing from just my basic obligation to do mitzvahs, or is that a unique type of a thing? So there's some dispute as to whether Rambam thinks tshuva is a mitzvah or confession is a mitzvah.
Well, compassion is not.
What?
Compassion is
Yeah. So is there tshuva, and then part of doing tshuva is also you need to do confession, or is there no mitzvah of tshuva, but when you do tshuva, you need mitzvah to do confession? There's some dispute about this because of, and one of the issues boils down to is also the Rambam's wording, but probably the issue is down like if you're going to say it's a mitzvah, you have to define the act as something specific. In this case, if you say the recommitment, right, the resolve to never sin again is distinct from the general commitment to Torah mitzvahs that we're supposed to have. If you say that, then you could say that tshuva itself is a mitzvah. Okay. That's how the Alter Rebbe understands the Rambam, but not everyone. The Rebbe is a very nice yichlas. Okay, moving on to the topic at hand. What about being holy? Is being holy a mitzvah, according to the Rambam?
Does it get specific of what that means? Like,
And the Rambam uses this as a classic example of something which is not a mitzvah. Yeah, because how is one holy? By keeping the mitzvahs. That's what makes you holy. So it's an all-inclusive general mitzvah. The Ramban, Nachmanides, he disagrees. And he says, no. That shouldn't be counted as a mitzvah, which means keep the number 6 and have to give it some other mitzvahs. We're not going to worry about that. Why should it be counted as a mitzvah? Because it does tell you to do something specific. And what is the specific thing it tells you to do? What? No, that's not a specific thing.
where it sits.
Yes. Kaddish atzmacha b'motorach. Sanctify yourself in those things that are permitted to you. Just because it's kosher, and just because it tastes good, and just because blah, 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 is not a good enough reason to do stuff. And so, there is a mitzvah in the Torah, to put it very simply, to not be indulgent. to not just do things because you have an animalistic urge, even if there's nothing wrong with it. A mitzvah, according to Ramban, and also the Alter Rebbe, there's going to be a difference between them, which we'll talk about later. But there is a mitzvah in the Torah, just like there's a mitzvah to make kiddush, and there's a mitzvah to eat matzah. There's a mitzvah to be holy or make yourself holy, setting aside the difference. And what does that mean on a very basic level? What are you supposed to do? It doesn't mean keep Shabbos and kosher. It means don't do things that are perfectly permitted just because you have the animalistic urge to do them. Simple enough? Okay. Now, what happens when a person sins? According to Chassidus. What are they doing when they sin? They're disconnecting from God. Good? Yes? So far, so good? Now, if you have the opportunity to do a positive mitzvah and you choose not to, then what are you doing? It's a sin, right? And so that is disconnecting from God, right? So if it's Pesach and I refuse to eat the matzah, and I go through the whole night of the Seder and I don't eat the matzah because I chose to, not because I couldn't, then I have separated myself from God. God forbid, yes? So far so good? So far so bad, actually, but get the point? Okay. Now, I have a, chocolate fudge sundae in front of me that I really want to eat because of my animalistic urges. And there's a mitzvah in the Torah to what?
To not indulge.
To not to indulge my animalistic urges, right? And then I go eat the sundae. So what did I do?
Indulge.
I neglected. I chose to not fulfill a positive mitzvah, right? Right? And if in other words, like this, think like this. If I don't eat it, then I just fulfill the positive mitzvah, right? Maybe it's not so simple. That's a mitzvah that people don't do properly often.
I love using the mitzvah.
No, seriously, it's like one of those things where like the mitzvah is not about wasting food. The mitzvah is about being wantonly destructive. Have you ever finished all the food on your plate? Yeah, like literally all the food on your plate.
My specific plate.
Yeah, on your specific plate. Yeah, like you like wiped up all of the gravy and everything, so there's nothing left.
Yes.
I'm asking you. Okay, now, are you sure there's proper conduct? Maybe that makes you look like some sort of like a ravenous person and doesn't understand the notion of like it's okay you've eaten enough. Hey, look, there's a little bit of gravy left. Like, throw it away. No one's gonna eat it. It's fine. Really. Okay. On the other hand, right, to take a plastic cup, drink from it, throw it out. 5 minutes later, get a plastic cup, take it, drink, throw it out. What's that? That's just being wantonly wasteful. Like, you're going to have water throughout the day. Take one plastic cup and use it until, like, it's not reasonable to use it anymore, right? Why every 5 minutes you have to take a new plastic cup and throw it in the garbage? The mitzvah's learned out from destroying fruit trees in war. You're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree in war because it's just being wantonly destructive. Like, you need to siege it. Why? It's not an air enemy. Let the tree bear fruit. Okay? And then from there we extend all sorts of things. But it's about being wantonly destructive. It's not that nothing's ever allowed to go. Everything have to use every last scrap. It's like if it's not normal or becoming of a person to act a certain way, it's not normal for them to act a certain way. You don't have to like... Make sense? Okay. Fine. Where were we? So...
I thought this was talking about things that like are fully 100% allowed, but the COVID you know this isn't healthier with the sense that you shouldn't do it.
I know, so this is why I'm trying to create a problem. In other words, you're telling me that I'm supposed to be holy in the things that are permitted to you. So I have this kosher chocolate fudge, whatever, and I really want to eat it, and it's animalistic desire to eat it. And if I don't give in to eating it, then what am I doing? I'm doing this mitzvah of the Torah, right? This biblical commandment, right? Sanctify yourself, be holy, whatever version you want. Okay. But if I choose not to do it, then what did I just do? It's like choosing not to do a mitzvah when you have the opportunity to mitzvah, and that's sinful, right? So if it's sinful, then when I eat the then when I'm eating the chocolate fudge sundae, I'm sinning, right? Well, if I'm sinning, is it mutter to do that? Is it permitted to sin?
No.
So it seems to be the paradox here. Like, if you're telling me it's a mitzvah to abstain, then it follows that it's a sin to indulge. And if it's a sin to indulge, then how am I describing that as permitted?
How's it feel?
Yeah, there's something off about this. Yes? Okay. So now, if I deal with this specifically in halacha context, there's ways out of this paradox, but I want to, because we're not learning halacha, we're learning Chassidus, we're learning Tanya, so I'm going to give you a Chassidic answer. So remember the Chassid I mentioned yesterday, Itcher the Masmid? So he once explained this, and he said, what is a sin? When something is forbidden, when the Torah says this is forbidden, what is the Torah telling you? The Torah is telling you, you're not allowed to do this because when you do this, you're going to cut yourself off from God. You're going to separate yourself from God. God is not letting you be separate from Him. Not He's not allowing you to do it. He is not giving you permission to do it. Let's differentiate. There's permission and there's ability. We have the ability to separate ourselves from Hashem? Unfortunately, yes, we do. Or fortunately, if you think about it, maybe another way, but do we have permission to? No, right? Okay. Now, you remember being a teenager? And remember that there's certain things that your parents don't let you do. I mean, you have the ability to do them, but they do not let you do them. Right? You're not forced to do them, right? Because they think they're bad for you to do. Right? They really don't want you to do them, right? And then there are things that your parents don't want you to do. No, because they think they're bad for you. They don't really want you to do them. But because you're a teenager, they have decided to give you permission to do them anyway. Are they happy that you used the permission? Would they prefer that you didn't? But they're not going to make it. We're not going to make that the letter of the law. They're giving you permission to do something stupid and face the consequences. They'd rather you didn't. So, right, there's 3 levels. Level 1 is, well, there's 4 levels. Level 1 is stuff you're not capable of doing. Right? This is like great when you have a toddler, you put them in the crib, and they can't get out of the crib. Problem solved, right? They literally can't. Then level 2 is stuff that people are capable of doing, but the parents don't allow them to do it. Then there's level 3. What's level 3? Things that people are capable of doing. The parents don't want them to do it, but the parents nonetheless allow it. And then what's level 4? Level 4 is the stuff the parents actually want the kid to do. Now, why do you have that level, that in-between level? Stuff the parents really don't want you to do, but they allow you to do it anyway. Why do they have that level?
Because they know you're going to do it.
Behind their backs.
What?
Because they don't want you to do it behind their backs.
So you don't do it because you're not doing it just to spite them.
You're not doing it just to spite them, not to do it behind their back. What are some other reasons? Those are all valid reasons. I'm not. There's going to be more than one reason. What are some other reasons?
If you allow them to do something that they want them to for.
If you allow them to do it, right? Once they're doing it once they have the space to do something with permission, right? Maybe then they won't do stuff that's far worse because they'll respect those.
They'll come to a realization that it's not something that I actually want.
Right? They'll learn from you. Right? Ein chacham kabal nasai, known as wise, is the person who goes through the experience himself. Right? The best way to make sure that somebody never puts their hand in the hot stove is to allow them to put their hand once on the hot stove. Right? There's a fancy term for this, I think, in science, which is one trial learning, which is something registers in the brain so quickly that you don't need a repeat version. You've learned it. Right? And sometimes, no matter explaining, right? So you have to parents make these considerations. Not always do they make the proper judgment, right? But whatever. But that's why. Does that make sense? So Itcher the Masmid said that when the Torah says something's forbidden, God is saying, I am not allowing you to be separate from me. I'm not giving you permission to be separate from me. What about the things in the world which are permitted and we feel an indulgence for, we feel this animalistic drive for, and there's no real good reason for us to do it right now, we could delay, and there's a positive mitzvah in the Torah to not indulge? What is God saying? God's saying, I'm giving you permission to be separate. You want to be separate? Okay, be separate. You want? I'm not happy about it, but go be separate. See how that plays out for you.
Like the mitzvah to be holy?
So what is it? The mitzvah to be holy is because God really wants us not to be separated from Him, right? But when I don't do the mitzvah of being holy, am I sinning by not doing the mitzvah of being holy? No, because God gave me permission to not be holy if I don't want to. But am I disconnecting myself from Hashem while I'm being indulgent? I am, and I have permission to do that. I have permission to do that. And then what's going to happen?
So it's not an Avera?
It's not an Avera.
But
It's the same way. It's the same way when you tell your parents when you're a teenager, I really want to go to this party in my friend's house where there's no parents around, and your parents decide to say, we don't think that's a good idea. But you're 17 years old, and so we are not telling you're not allowed to. We think it's a very bad idea. So are you breaking the house rules when you go to the party? Does that make it much better? I mean, it depends how you look at it, right? It's still what it is what it is, right? And so, it's the Masmid, he said, when Torah says that, the animalistic things aren't forbidden, they're mutter, it just means that they're permitted. It doesn't mean that you're not indulgent. And God just saying, you know what? I give you permission to be separate and experience that and face the consequences. But I'm also giving you the opportunity to do something very profound and be connected with that mitzvah. So it's an interesting kind of mitzvah, right? Because it's not like if I indulge, I am doing something forbidden. But I am doing something which is cutting me, separating me from God, not because I'm violating the rule, but because of substance. What are you doing at that moment? There's a very famous verse which is that desire seeks out separateness. What does that mean? Desire seeks out separateness. When you do something just because it makes you feel good, who's the only person that matters to you subjectively at that moment? So are you really in relationship and connection with anyone else? It's not that pleasure is a bad thing, but it's the pursuit of your own pleasurable experiences causes you to sink into a solitary world where there's only one occupant, which is yourself. Now, does God say that you're not allowed to do that? As long as you're not doing it with pork and you're not doing it, by driving on Shabbos, then if you want to do it, I'll give you permission, but it's not recommended.
How much is this supposed to be a focus and also in Hashem? Like, I feel like for most people, we're still aiming to try to keep all the mitzvahs and to not do an Avera. So, like, how much is this supposed to take priority?
It has zero relevance if you're worried about doing Averas. Zero relevance. Zero. How should I say this again? Zero.
What do you?
Well, you have a teenager, and the teenager doesn't really care so much about the quality of relationship with their parents. They're in that streak of where all they care about is their social life and their friends and their autonomy, and they don't really want to have a relationship with their parents, which happens at certain points in being a teenager. They're going with one of those phases, yeah. But it's important to them that they're not some sort of rebellious kid that gets in fights with their parents and gets out of the house and gets punished. Okay, so there's clear rules. What are the expectations the parents have, right? When's curfew? What are you allowed to do? What you're not allowed to do? And he does the rules. And if that's where the person's holding, what else do you want from them? Right? If a person's whole concern is, what am I making sure that there's rules and I'm following those rules? God has expectations, I have to follow expectations. That's the whole framework in which they're relating to this stuff. Then everything we're learning has zero relevance. Now, you could have a person who has a hard time keeping mitzvahs because they're not used to it, and it's all new to them. But the whole framework is, I really want to be closer to Hashem. Well, if you want to be closer to Hashem, there's room for flexibility, right? There's room for, a little of this and a little of that, and trying a little of this and trying a little of this, and figure it out. And it's not all or nothing. And even the things that I'm not doing, which are luckily mandated, it's because I'm growing, and not because I'm saying in principle I don't have to do them, but because, you can't build habits in an instant. We really have to be honest. Is a person trying to be close to Hashem, or is a person trying to conform to rules? And it's not it's one or the other entirely, but to the degree that it's about conforming to the rules, then 100%. There is no halacha that says that you are not allowed to do something because you would not be fulfilling this mitzvah of being holy. There's no such halacha. But it is neglecting to do a mitzvah, which does imply there's some level of separateness involved, and it makes sense that there's separateness involved. But Hashem is saying you can be separate if you want to be separate. That's your choice. I'm not going to hold that against you. The negativity of being separate exists, and if that means important to you, okay. But if it's important to you, then you have to be honest with who you are and approach it accordingly. And keep in mind also that we're talking about where it's where there's an animalistic urge, right? Not where I mentioned this yesterday, right? That there's this tradition in Imperial Russia, right? There's no escaffi on tea, cabbage, and a cigarette. Yeah, it's like there's certain things that are just the normal functioning of people, and it's not even indulgence. Just we're embodied creatures. We live in the world, and like we have pillows and blankets. It's fine. But it really does depend on how you. If there's a sense that God is standing over me and saying, "Why aren't you doing this?" Then the whole thing doesn't work. That's exactly the point. What is being demanded of you? What are the rules you have to play by? Now, if you realize that not everything is the rules, going back to we've come up before in different classes about marriage, right? It says in the Ksuba, the husband has certain X, Y, and Z obligations to the wife has certain X, Y, and Z obligations to the husband. Okay, like you could technically like do everything based on that, right? Everyone opens up their Rambam or Code of Jewish Law, and the wife's like, "Well, I have met my legal obligations for today. I am done." It's like, okay, you could do that, but it's not just missing the point. It's fine. You can do that, and it is what it is. But if that's the mindset you're in, then anything that rests on the idea of connectivity, of engagement, of closeness, just is not relevant. And it's the same thing with Hashem. This whole discussion is based on that, right? And so this is what the last point was. It's like, yeah, if you do this stuff, you're fulfilling a mitzvah, and if you don't do it, it's not like you're sinning. It's not really a sin. There is an element of separateness. And if you care about the separateness from Hashem because you care about the relationship element, so then you have to think about that. And by the way, this is where being honest is important. Which is, can you be totally unified with God in all aspects of your being at every moment of your life? Do you have that capability?
Not right now.
Okay, fine. So if you can't, does that now mean that more closeness with Hashem is automatically worthless? That's the mindset that has to be.
This is about what's the goal.
Right. And you know what? Maybe this kind of closeness that's achieved through this mitzvah is so important to you. You're willing to sacrifice all sorts of other worldly things for it. And if that's the case, okay, maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But that's, again, personal and individual between that person and the relationship with God. It's not like something that can be expected and demanded and imposed on anybody. Now, the other thing is also true, which is if this really does assist you, right, and you want a little bit of a boost in your relationship with Hashem, so maybe you can do it, I'm doing it not because I feel close, because I want to feel close, and I know that this is going to, it's like going to bring that holiness into my life, and then I'll be able, that's also easy. But if it's not about a sense of connection and closeness, then it's not going to work. There's no... Now, and for this, I want to actually introduce another halacha. There is a halacha that person is not allowed to behave in a gluttonous manner. You want to differentiate. What is a gluttonous manner? So, if you were to see somebody, okay, eating, and they keep eating, and they keep eating, and they keep eating, and you can see that, like, they're, like, really working to get more food in their mouth because it tastes so good. But you can see, like, it takes, like, effort because they've eaten so much. And you look at that. Do you have some sort of disgust? Because it's disgusting. Okay, that's called a chilagasa, which loosely translated as crass eating, and it's forbidden. Stuffing your face is forbidden. This is not what we're talking about here. Stuffing your face is, you can feel it, you feel yourself, and if someone's looking at you, it's like, right? This unfortunately happens to some people eating Kaufmann, right? They ate so much other food. And they're like, and it actually says in halacha, be careful, because if you have to stuff the Kaufmann down your throat, you're not actually filling the mitzvah, because normal eating ends when the chilagasa begins. Normal eating is you eat food as well. The Romans, because they were such whatever, they used to vomit between courses so they could eat more food. That's disgusting, you understand? It's disgusting. What?
What's the point?
Exactly. Okay, so
They like to think.
they look at this. The Talmud speaks about rich people who would make this potion so they could vomit between the courses and whatever. Like, there are things which are not indulgent in the sense of what we're talking about here. There are things which are just debased. You understand there's a difference? So yes, does Hashem expect each and every one of his children, for that matter, probably all of humanity, not to behave in a debased manner? Yes. Now, but we're not talking about that. We're saying, okay, wait, you're acting within the realm of normal. There's nothing obscene about what you're doing. There's an animalistic urge, and the question is, okay, giving into that does create the separation from Hashem. Overcoming that creates a profound closeness to Hashem, and you have the permission to decide whether you want to do it or not. But when you do it, you are fulfilling a mitzvah. But if you choose not to do it, it's not like you're going to be, punished for the transgression of not doing it. No. But what happens to a person as they live a life of separation from Hashem, that still does happen to a person. But that's the fun thing we often do. Like, we live in a world where we're physical, we have bodies, we have animal souls, we have all sorts of things, and nobody gets through this, unscathed, and that's fine. And a person has to just develop the relationship with Hashem that's genuine and real. Because if all you're concerned is about what I'm required to do, you can skip chapter 27. It's the second half anyway. The first half you probably should focus on, because forbidden thoughts are forbidden. In the actual living culture of Chassidim, it is very rare to have seen big Chassidim who you could have mistaken for ascetics. Meaning people who were always abstaining because, this is animalistic urge. For the most part, there's a little here and a little there, each person on their level, and you couldn't really tell because something about between them and God. And there are a few extreme examples that weren't like it. Because it's not like, you like it, so you're not allowed to do it. Now, I do want to point out something else, which is somewhat unrelated, but it's somewhat unrelated, which is there is an important thing of self-mastery, which is not what's being discussed here. What is self-mastery? Something we can all work on, which is just because I want to doesn't mean I have to. And that's just a good thing to have in life as a human being. And you can practice that. And practicing that means doing what? Not doing something just because you want to do it. Right? And learning to be able to actually move forward and live and not resent that, and people can grow in that, right? In fact, a lot of what military training is in the beginning stages involves that, which is you don't want to do it. You can discover you can do it anyway. You feel like you can't go forward, discover that you actually can go forward. Feel like you really want this, realize that you can actually go without it. And the person gains a certain level of freedom and mastery. So that's an idea, but that's not what's discussed here, right? Yeah.
What's discussed here is it a value that we should try and teach kids, or it's something that once you're an adult who has an understanding.
Should you teach this to children? You should teach children delayed gratification. We should teach children impulse control, and we should teach children to learn to appreciate things in a less selfish and narcissistic manner. I don't think you should teach this to children. It requires a certain level of maturity that children don't have. What I mean less selfish manner? It is an important thing when you walk outside with your child and it is a nice day to point out that it is a nice day. And it is pleasant that it is a nice day. And it is wonderful that Hashem has given us this nice day, right? And that when you're eating ice cream, to realize that ice cream does in fact taste good. And it is nice to have the ice cream. And someone bought them the ice cream, and Hashem gave them the ice cream, right? To learn to appreciate things with a sense of connectedness and gratitude. That's an important thing, because none of this stuff, the notion of relationship and connection doesn't exist for a person in deep ways. It's not going to work, right? Self-control is obviously important, but this requires something a little bit more, a deeper sense, a sense of me, a sense of you, a sense of who I want to be vis-a-vis somebody else. That's kind of stuff you start developing, as you start becoming much more of an individual person. You start becoming a teenager and stuff.
Because the real point of it can kind of get lost.
100%. 100%. And one of the things where you can tell this is that when the point of it gets lost, is it becomes very much of, because going back to it, there are things that are forbidden. Then even things that are technically permitted right? But if they're done in an incredibly debased way, that itself is forbidden to be disgusting and debased and whatever. That's actually Torah prohibition. Some of it's rabbinic, some of it's Torah, whatever. And there's an objective quality you can point to and say, like, don't do that, don't act like that, don't do those types of things, right? Okay, and you can debate where those range of those things are, okay? But should you take the whole pizza and just start eating it like this? Like, no, like it's not mentionless. Like, no, you don't know it. Right? Like some of my kids when they're younger, they have this thing where, I don't know, kids aren't born knowing stuff, and so they're hungry, and so like they sit down and there's like, I don't know, whatever they want to eat, and no one got them a fork, and so they start, So sometimes they just pick them. Sometimes they'll just go and pour the food in their mouth. It's like, you're not a dog. Put the food down, get a fork. Like, you have to tell the 3-year-old and the 4-year-old. They're not going to like, okay, yeah, there's such a thing. Like, we need to be dignified, and we can point to, this is not this. What we're talking about here is very internal. It requires a sense of who I am and who Hashem is and what the connection means to me, right? And realizing the animalistic nature of the urge and wanting to, okay. And it's a wonderful mitzvah to realize that and to then fulfill that mitzvah, and it's tremendously valuable. And at the same time, it's not like if you don't do it, now you've sinned by doing this behavior, because the behavior is not, it's mutar mudamri, right? It's completely permissible. And so what that would mean in the context of this thing separating you from Hashem because you're engaging in the unholy is that you're getting permission to be separate from God, which, if you think about it, is actually a very profound thing, because if someone gives you permission to be separate from them, they're giving you a certain degree of autonomy, right? That also means now when you're connected, it's a different kind of connection.
I'm a little bit confused because Hashem told us specifically the ways in which He wants us to connect Him through the mitzvahs. So it feels like kind of like, not like picking and choosing, but like we're deciding for ourselves what we think Hashem, like the way Hashem wants us to be connected, like by deciding for ourselves what we feel is.
Well, so the point is, He did give a mitzvah here, which is be holy. And the mitzvah has criteria, which is not indulging in animalistic urges, even if there's nothing else wrong with them. So we didn't decide that, but what we do decide whether we want to do the mitzvah. It's not that if you don't do the mitzvah, you're sinning by default by not doing the mitzvah. There are other mitzvahs that work like this halachically. For instance, men have an obligation to wear tzitzis, correct? Wrong. They have no obligation to wear tzitzis. Zero.
On a four-cornered garment.
Men have an obligation that if they are wearing a four-cornered garment, that four-cornered garment must have tzitzis.
So in order to do that mitzvah, they specifically...
And it does say someone who fears God will endeavor to buy a four-cornered garment so that he can do the mitzvah of tzitzis. But if I choose never to wear a four-cornered garment the rest of my life, and therefore I never wear tzitzis, I'm technically not sinning. It's my choice. There are many mitzvahs that are choice-dependent, and therefore you're not. What's interesting here is the choice is to indulge in the unholy. And God's like, yeah, you have the choice to indulge. Like, you can't eat the pork. That's not your choice. I'm not giving. That's not. You don't have. I mean, you actually have the ability to do it, but I'm not. Like, that's not. You don't have permission to do that. You don't have permission to drive on Shabbos. But you know what? If you want to indulge in animalistic desires within this framework, you have permission to do that. And it has all the negative consequences of indulging in the unholy. But I'm not going to stand in judgment over you if you do it. I'm giving you permission. But if you don't do it, there will be a very deep connection that will be forged. That's a mitzvah in the Torah, according to the Ramban, and according to the Alter Rebbe. The Rambam doesn't think of this, but whatever. And we're going to learn next week. We'll learn about the difference between them. But what that also means, by the way, and this is a very, very important thing. In order to really say yes to something, you need to be able to say no.
Like have the option?
Within yourself. So if I would never violate the rules that God has given me, because that's just wrong. That's not okay. I wouldn't do that. So where do I have the choice to connect to Him and not be separate? Yeah.
But then it sounds like it's a mitzvah for being Him. People like already.
What's a mitzvah what?
Then it doesn't sound like it's a mitzvah for a regular person who does have.
No. It means what it means is that being a Baini doesn't mean struggling with doing what is forbidden. That's what it means. It means the real essence of being a Baini actually goes much deeper. It means the struggle of being human and having a relationship with God. Now, for many of us, that devolves into realms of the forbidden. Okay, so we have to deal with that. But what Don was pointing out is like that's not really like it's not about it's allowed or it's not allowed. It's quite human to humans are animals. We're very special kinds of animals, but there's an animalistic side to us.
So then how does this fit in with this halacha?
That's exactly the point. A Beinoni on a fundamental level never does this halacha. Transformation. Now we'll learn later on when we'll get to chapter 35 and onwards. We're going to start talking about this idea, and then come back to the idea of physical mitzvahs and whatever. But within the person himself, a Beinoni doesn't really do his halacha.
And it's not ideal to do that.
It's ideal. It's wonderful. It's just they don't, and that gets qualified. Okay. But as a broad thing, it's true. Now, what is also true is that when we say that Beinoni doesn't do his halacha, this transformation, that itself has to be understood in a very absolute sense. It's not when you look at things, in a relative sense, you can say, okay, you can become more refined. We're going to speak about it, even over here. He's going to talk about this. Okay, but on a very basic fundamental level, yes, someone who's not a tzaddik there is this tension between being human and God, and tzaddikim have somehow turned themselves into a vessel for what is holy, and the rest of us have not, and there's a tension there. And yes, there are things God lays down the law and says, this you may not do, and if you do it, then we got serious problems we're going to need to deal with. But even outside of that, there's this tension. It's look, you're human. You need your space to, do your sophisticated chimpanzee thing. Okay, I'm not going to hold it against you, but don't expect me to enjoy it, and don't expect me to be there with you. And if you want to be with me, this actually is a tremendous opportunity to take. If you want to be together with me, and that's that's what actually, like, for lack of words, adult relationships are really like. People are different. They don't line up on everything, and there's space to say, no, you do that on your own. And then there's space to say, you know what, I'm going to go a little bit out of my comfort zone to be together with you, right? That exists in romantic relationships, in adult relationships with parents, in adult friendships. And so that's kind of what's being described here. Right? And making it all about what's allowed and not allowed, it's a matter of the boundaries of the relationship. And they're saying there's something beyond the boundaries of the relationship. There's the qualitative notion of autonomy versus connection. Yeah.
But if a sin is separating you from God, and this is separating you from God, what's the difference?
Yes, but a cat is an animal. Yes, and a chimpanzee is an animal, but it doesn't mean that the chimpanzee is a cat. A sin separates you from God. This separates you from God. It doesn't mean that they're the same thing.
So, what's the quality?
The thing is like this. What's separating you from God is the indulgence. The fact that you're giving into your animalistic urge. A sin separates you from God because God told you not to do it and you disregarded him. It's not the same kind of thing.
Right, but like that actual quality of the separation.
It's not the same kind of separation. It's not.
It's a different
It's
level.
a totally different. And if you go back to chapter 7, you'll see that reflected, that undoing the separation for indulgent behavior is not a big deal. It's not hard to do.
Right.
Where undoing the separation caused by transgression and sin is extremely difficult to do. So not the same thing. Separation is separation, yeah, but not all separation is the same. Yeah. Right? If you say to somebody, look, this is really important to me, please don't do X, right? And they go and do X wantonly, like something fundamental is broken about the whole relationship, right? If you tell a person, look, I don't like X, I don't want to be around you when you do X, I understand you need to do X, I'm giving you space to do X, just don't expect me to be there with you. And then they go and do X, it's a tension you're going to need to deal with, but it's not the same thing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Are we good? This makes sense somewhat? Put this in very simple words. Is it ever okay for a person to decide, today, I don't feel like keeping all the halachas, so I'm just not going to keep all of them? Is it ever okay for a person to decide, today, I don't feel like doing so much being holy, I'm only going to do a little bit, or maybe even none at all? That's okay. Doesn't make it ideal, doesn't make it holy. It's okay for you to do that. Are there going to be consequences if you do that? Sure, there's consequences, right? But it's a legitimate choice to make. It's our choice to make, and it's fine. Fine? Okay. Next week we will go into what the Alter Rebbe describes as the difference between his version of the mitzvah, which is kaddish, to make yourself holy, sanctify yourself, versus the way the Ramban learns out from a different verse, which is kaddish tiyu, be holy.